When I came home from the rehabilitation center, my daughter was standing in my kitchen holding a stack of papers that carried my
Mother,
own signature.
These are the documents
Mom,
you need to sign right here.
The house belongs to me now.
I don't understand. How could you do this to
Emily
me?
said calmly. I stared at the deed, my hands trembling. I didn't remember signing away the home my late husband and I had spent 40 years building together. The house where Daniel died. The house where I raised my only child. Emily told me I had agreed to everything while I was sick. But there was one thing my daughter didn't know. Months earlier, an old answering machine hidden in my husband's workshop had recorded a phone call that was never meant to be heard. And that forgotten call would eventually destroy every lie she told. If you've ever trusted someone with your whole heart and later wondered whether you truly knew them, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please like and subscribe if stories like mine speak to you. And before we continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are tonight. Sometimes, knowing we're not alone makes these stories a little easier to tell. My name is Kayla Adams, and until 2 years ago, I believed I had lived a good life. Not a perfect life, not an easy one, but a good one. I was 68 years old when everything began to fall apart, though the truth is that the first crack had probably appeared long before I ever noticed it. I spent 38 years teaching second grade at Jefferson Elementary in Columbus, Ohio. Children had always been easier for me to understand than adults. Children usually told you exactly what they wanted. Adults smiled while hiding disappointment, jealousy, regret, or resentment behind their eyes. I retired at 64. My husband, Daniel Adams, had retired 3 years earlier from the city water department. He was the kind of man who could repair anything with a toolbox and enough patience. The neighbors often joked that Daniel could fix a broken lawnmower, a leaking pipe, and a broken heart all in the same afternoon. We bought our house in 1983. Back then, it was a small white house sitting on a quiet street lined with maple trees. The roof leaked. The kitchen cabinets were falling apart. The front porch leaned slightly to one side. But Daniel looked at me and said, "Kayla, this house isn't what it is now. It's what it can become." And somehow, over 40 years, it became our entire life. The oak tree in the front yard was planted when our daughter Emily turned 5. The dining room walls still carried tiny pencil marks where we measured her height every birthday. The guest bedroom became Daniel's workshop after retirement. The backyard garden was my sanctuary. Every corner of that house held a memory. Every floorboard knew our footsteps. When Daniel died from a heart attack 4 years ago, I thought I would have to sell the house because the silence inside it felt unbearable. But after the funeral, I walked from room to room and realized something. Daniel was still there, not physically, but everywhere. His reading glasses still sat beside his chair. His favorite coffee mug remained in the cabinet. His old work jacket hung inside the garage. Leaving the house would have felt like losing him all over again. So I stayed. Emily supported my decision at first. She lived about 40 minutes away with her husband Jason in a newer neighborhood outside Columbus. They had been married for almost 20 years and had no children. Emily worked as an office manager at a dental clinic, and Jason owned a home remodeling business. At least, that was what he called it. Over the years, the business seemed to struggle more than succeed. There were always problems, customers who didn't pay, contracts that fell through, equipment that broke, employees who quit. Jason always had an explanation. He was friendly enough to me, but something about him made me uncomfortable. He smiled too quickly. He complimented people too easily. And whenever he visited, his eyes seemed to wander around the house. "This place has to be worth a fortune now," he once said during Thanksgiving dinner. I laughed. "Not really." He smiled. "You'd be surprised." Emily immediately changed the subject. At the time, I didn't think much about it. People talk about real estate all the time. But after Daniel died, those conversations happened more often. Jason would ask if I had a will. Emily asked if I had considered downsizing. They both suggested moving to a retirement community. At first I thought they were simply worried about me. Living alone at my age does carry risks. I slipped on the ice one winter. I fell while reaching for Christmas decorations. I forgot where I left my car keys more than once. Small things, normal things, but Emily seemed increasingly concerned. You shouldn't be alone all the time, Mom. I'm fine. What if something happens? I've lived here for 40 years. That's exactly what worries me. The conversations always ended politely, but they never truly ended. One Sunday afternoon, Emily sat beside me on the porch while we drank iced tea. The summer air was warm, and the maple leaves moved gently above us. She looked at the house for a long time. You know, she said quietly, Dad would want you to be comfortable. I am comfortable. You don't need all this space. I smiled. Maybe not. She hesitated. Have you ever thought about what happens to the house someday? I looked at her. I suppose someday you'll inherit it. She nodded. Eventually. Something about the way she said that word stayed with me. Eventually, as if she had been thinking about it longer than I realized. Still, she was my daughter, my only child. I had carried her for 9 months, stayed awake beside her hospital bed when she had pneumonia at age 8, worked extra tutoring jobs to help pay for college, helped her buy her first car, helped pay for her wedding. Even after Daniel died, Emily became more involved in my life. She called several times a week. She brought groceries. She drove me to appointments. She helped with paperwork. Friends often told me how lucky I was. Linda Brooks, my next-door neighbor for 25 years, said one afternoon, You know how many people your age would love to have a daughter that attentive. I smiled. I am lucky. Linda nodded. Just don't let yourself become too dependent. I laughed. Emily would never take advantage of me. Linda didn't answer immediately. She stirred sugar into her coffee. I'm sure she wouldn't. But her voice sounded uncertain. I ignored it, perhaps because I didn't want to imagine another possibility. The truth is that grief changes people. After Daniel died, I became lonely. Lonely people often mistake attention for safety. When Emily started visiting more often, I welcomed it. When she organized my medications, I thanked her. When she handled bills online, I appreciated it. When she suggested simplifying my finances, I agreed. It felt comforting to have someone nearby. What I didn't realize was that dependency grows quietly. It doesn't arrive all at once. It enters through small doors. One favor, one signature, one conversation, one decision. Looking back now, I can see moments that should have worried me. Jason asking about property taxes. Emily asking where important documents were stored. Questions about insurance policies. Questions about bank accounts. Questions about my will. At the time, I believed they were planning for the future. Their future. My future. Our future. I never imagined those conversations had already become something else entirely. One evening, just before winter arrived, Jason stood in my garage looking at Daniel's old tools. You know, he said casually, houses like this are investments. I smiled. This isn't an investment. What is it? It's my home. He nodded politely, but his answer came quietly. Sometimes those become the same thing. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Today, I remember every single word. Because before long, illness would enter my life. And while I was fighting to stay alive, other people would begin making plans for the house that Daniel and I spent 40 years building together. Plans I knew absolutely nothing about. The winter I became sick began like every other winter in Ohio. The first snow arrived in late November. The maple tree in my front yard lost its final leaves. The mornings became colder, and the silence inside my house seemed heavier than usual. Sometimes I would wake before sunrise and sit in Daniel's old recliner with a cup of coffee, listening to the furnace click on and off. Loneliness has a sound. People who have never lived alone after losing someone often don't understand that. The house itself begins to breathe. Floorboards creak, pipes groan, the refrigerator hums, and sometimes you imagine footsteps that are no longer there. By January, I had developed what I thought was a simple cold, a sore throat, a mild cough, a little fatigue. I wasn't particularly worried. At 68, colds seemed to last longer than they used to. I made tea, took over-the-counter medicine, and promised myself I would call my doctor if things didn't improve. Emily called one evening. "You sound terrible, Mom. It's just a cold." "When was the last time you saw your doctor?" "Last fall." She sighed. "Please make an appointment." I promised her I would, but I didn't. I had always been stubborn about illness. Daniel used to tease me that I could teach school with a broken arm and still refuse to see a doctor. Unfortunately, this time my stubbornness nearly killed me. 3 days later, I woke up unable to catch my breath. The room spun around me. My chest burned. Walking from my bedroom to the kitchen felt like climbing a mountain. I remember sitting at the kitchen table trying to drink water, while my hands shook so badly that I spilled half the glass. For the first time in years, I became frightened. I called Emily. She arrived within 40 minutes. The moment she saw me, her face changed. "Mom, we're going to the hospital." "I just need rest." "No, we're going now." The emergency room doctor diagnosed severe pneumonia. My oxygen levels were dangerously low. The infection had spread further than anyone expected. I remember nurses attaching monitors to my chest, doctors asking questions, bright lights, cold hands, machines beeping. Then everything became blurry. The next several days remained scattered pieces inside my memory. I remember Emily sitting beside my bed. I remember Jason standing near the window, speaking quietly on his phone. I remember signing something, or at least I think I remember. Someone handed me papers. Someone pointed where to sign. Someone said they needed permission. But pain medication and fever have a way of stealing certainty. Sometimes I slept for hours. Sometimes I woke up confused. One afternoon, I opened my eyes and saw Emily holding a folder. "Mom, I need you to sign this so I can handle some things while you're here." "What things?" "Bills, insurance, utilities, nothing important." I remember trying to focus on the paper. The words seemed to move. "I can't see. I'll explain everything later. Right now you need to rest." Her voice sounded calm, comforting, motherly. For a brief moment, our roles had reversed. I trusted her completely. After all, she was my daughter. If your own child asks for your signature while you're lying in a hospital bed, why would you suspect anything I signed? At least I believe I did. Even now, I cannot tell you exactly what those papers contained. The following week became worse. The pneumonia damaged my lungs enough that I required rehabilitation before returning home. The doctors explained that I was weak and would need physical therapy. Emily handled everything. She spoke with the doctors. She talked to insurance representatives. She collected my mail. She brought clean clothes. Every nurse who entered my room commented on how devoted my daughter seemed. "You are lucky," one nurse told me. I know. And at that moment, I truly believed I was. When I was transferred to the rehabilitation center, Emily became even more involved. "Mom, give me your checkbook." "Why?" "So I can pay your bills." "Okay." "Where are your insurance documents?" "In the desk drawer at home." "I'll take care of them." She made everything sound so reasonable, so necessary, so loving. One afternoon, she sat beside my bed with a small notebook. I wrote down all your passwords. I frowned. My passwords? Online banking, utility accounts, insurance. Why, in case something happens. Something about those words bothered me. In case what happens? She smiled. Nothing. I'm just being responsible. I wanted to ask more questions, but I was exhausted. Physical therapy consumed most of my energy. Walking 10 feet felt impossible. Standing from a chair made my legs tremble. At night, I cried quietly because I hated feeling weak. Daniel had always taken care of me when I was sick. Now, there was only Emily. During one visit, I noticed Jason speaking to a man outside my room. The man wore a suit. He carried a leather briefcase. When I asked Emily who he was, she answered quickly. Insurance paperwork. Insurance for what? Just paperwork, Mom. Everything became paperwork. Every question received the same answer. Paperwork, documents, forms, authorizations. Meanwhile, my world had shrunk to a hospital bed and short walks down a rehabilitation hallway. One afternoon, I asked about my mail. Emily smiled. I've got it. My bills? Handled. My taxes? Handled. The house? Everything's fine. It should have comforted me. Instead, a strange uneasiness began growing inside me. Not because Emily was helping, because I no longer knew exactly what she was helping with. A few days later, Linda called. At least she tried to. I learned about it by accident. My cell phone had been sitting inside my bedside drawer. Its battery had died. When I finally charged it, I saw 6 missed calls from Linda. 2 voicemails. The first message said, Kayla honey, call me when you can. The second message sounded worried. Emily says you're sleeping every time I call. I just wanted to check on you. I called her immediately. Linda. Oh, thank goodness. You've been trying to reach me. For weeks. Weeks. I kept asking Emily if I could visit. What did she say? She said you needed rest. I sat quietly, because nobody had ever told me Linda wanted to visit. She was probably protecting me. Linda hesitated. Maybe. The word lingered between us. Maybe. That evening, Emily arrived carrying more papers. Just some hospital forms. I looked at them. The words blurred together. I'm tired. It'll only take a minute? She pointed to several lines. I signed them, or perhaps some of them. I honestly don't know. That uncertainty still haunts me. Because while I was struggling to breathe, struggling to walk, struggling to recover, decisions were being made around me. Documents were moving. Information was changing hands. And my daughter, the person I trusted most in the world, was becoming the gatekeeper to every part of my life. I still believed she was protecting me. I had no idea that little by little I was losing control of everything, including the house Daniel and I had built together. By early March, the rehabilitation center had started to feel less like a place for recovery and more like a place where time disappeared. The days blended together. Breakfast arrived at 7, physical therapy at 9, medication at noon, another therapy session in the afternoon, dinner before sunset, lights out by 9. Every day felt identical. My lungs were improving slowly, but my strength had not returned. Walking down the hallway with a walker still exhausted me. Some mornings, I woke up feeling optimistic. Other mornings, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried before anyone entered the room. Aging is difficult. Losing your health is harder. But losing your independence is the part nobody prepares you for. Emily continued visiting nearly every day. The nurses adored her. Your daughter is wonderful. She takes such good care of you. You're blessed. I smiled every time, because I believed it. She brought me clean pajamas. She brought my favorite lotion. She brushed my hair when my hands shook. Sometimes she sat beside my bed and read magazines while I slept. She looked exactly like the daughter every mother hopes to have. Yet little things had started to trouble me. Tiny things, easy things to ignore. One afternoon, I asked for my house keys. Emily looked surprised. What do you need them for? I just wanted to know where they are. I have them? Why? In case something needs attention. I nodded. That seemed reasonable. A week later, I asked about my checkbook. It's safe? My tax papers. At my house. My insurance documents. I organized everything. Every answer ended the same way. I've got it, Mom. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they made me feel strangely absent from my own life. One afternoon, Linda called again. This time, I answered immediately. Kayla, honey, are you all right? I'm getting stronger. I've tried visiting several times. I frowned. What do you mean? Emily said the doctors didn't want visitors. I looked around my room. Visitors came every day. Family members visited other patients constantly. No one told me. Linda became quiet. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. Perhaps, but something inside me began to shift. That evening, I asked Emily directly. Linda says she's been trying to visit. Emily looked uncomfortable. You needed rest. I could have seen her. You've been exhausted. I would have liked the choice. Her expression hardened for only a second. So now you're upset because I'm trying to protect you? No. Because honestly, Mom, I've rearranged my entire life these past weeks. I immediately felt guilty. She sighed heavily. Jason is handling everything at home. I'm driving back and forth every day. I'm managing your bills, your house, your insurance, your doctors. I appreciate that. I know you do. But the warmth between us had changed. For the first time, I felt as if I had done something wrong. After she left, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation. Perhaps I was being ungrateful. Perhaps recovery had made me emotional. Perhaps Emily truly was overwhelmed. The next morning, during physical therapy, I noticed Jason standing outside the nurse's station. That was unusual. Jason rarely visited alone. He was speaking quietly to a man wearing a gray suit. The man held a leather folder. They both stopped talking when they noticed me. Jason smiled immediately. Hey, Kayla. Who's your friend? Oh, nobody important. The man shook my hand. Nice meeting you. He walked away. I looked at Jason. Who was that? Insurance guy. Insurance for what? He smiled. Just helping Emily with paperwork. Again, paperwork. Everything had become paperwork. Later that afternoon, Emily arrived carrying another folder. What's that? Some documents from your insurance company. I thought everything was finished. Almost. She sat beside my bed. Just sign here. I looked at the pages. The words swam together. The medication still made me dizzy. I don't understand these. You don't need to. Those words bothered me. What do you mean? It's just routine. I'd rather read them. She sighed. Mom, you're exhausted. You've trusted me your entire life. I looked at her. Her face appeared tired. Dark circles under her eyes. Her shoulders slumped. She looked like a daughter carrying the weight of the world. And perhaps she was. I signed. At least I think I signed. Even now I cannot say with certainty which documents I saw and which I didn't. Memory becomes unreliable when illness enters the picture. Several days later, Linda finally visited. Emily happened to be at work. Jason wasn't there. For the first time in weeks, I sat with someone who wasn't managing my medications, paying my bills, or discussing my recovery. She simply sat beside me. We drank coffee from paper cups. She held my hand. "You've lost weight." "I know." "You look tired." "I am." She hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Has Emily been handling everything?" "Yes." "Everything?" I nodded. Linda looked uneasy. "Maybe you should keep an eye on things." I laughed softly. "Linda, she's my daughter." "I know." "She would never hurt me." Linda looked down at her coffee. "I'm sure she wouldn't." But once again, there was something in her voice, something uncertain. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly. "Call me if you need anything." "I have Emily." She nodded. "Yes, you do." That evening, I returned to my room and opened my phone. Several messages had disappeared. Some emails had already been read. Bank notifications had been opened. I assumed Emily had accessed them while helping me. Still, a strange feeling settled inside me. Not fear. Not yet. Just confusion. As if my own life had continued moving forward while I remained trapped inside a hospital room. 2 days later, my doctor finally delivered good news. "You'll probably go home within a few weeks." Home. The word made me smile for the first time in months. I imagined my living room, my kitchen, Daniel's workshop, the maple tree outside my bedroom window. I imagined sleeping in my own bed. I imagined sitting on my porch with coffee. I imagined breathing the familiar air of my own house. Emily smiled when I told her. "That's wonderful." "I can't wait." She hesitated. "We may need to make some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" "Safety changes." "What do you mean?" "You can't live exactly the same way anymore." The word stung. I've lived there 40 years. And now things are different. I looked at her. There was concern in her face, but there was something else too. Something I couldn't quite identify. Control. For the first time since becoming sick, I realized that Emily no longer spoke to me as a daughter speaking to her mother. She spoke as someone making decisions, someone organizing my future, someone who had already decided what was best for me. And perhaps what frightened me most was that I had allowed it, little by little, document by document, decision by decision. I had handed her every key to my life, my finances, my home, my paperwork, my mail, my passwords, my trust. I still believed my daughter loved me. I still believed she wanted to help me. But somewhere deep inside me, a quiet voice had begun whispering, "What if you've already given away more than you realize?" I didn't know then how close that voice was to the truth. 3 weeks later, my doctor finally told me I could go home. I had imagined that day 100 different times. I imagined opening my front door. I imagined smelling the familiar scent of old wood and coffee. I imagined sitting in Daniel's recliner with a blanket over my knees. I imagined walking through each room and feeling grateful that I had survived. Home had become my reward. The finish line. The place I had fought to return to. The morning of my discharge, Emily arrived carrying my suitcase. "You ready?" she asked. I smiled. "I've been ready for weeks." The drive home felt strangely emotional. The trees had begun turning green again. Spring sunlight filled the roads. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. I looked out the window, and imagined Daniel waiting inside the house, as impossible as that was. Sometimes grief creates its own little fantasies. Emily drove quietly. Jason followed behind us in his truck. Neither of them spoke very much. I assumed they were tired. The closer we got to my neighborhood, the more excited I became. Then something strange happened. As we pulled into my driveway, I noticed two unfamiliar cars parked in front of the house. A pickup truck, a white van. The garage door stood open. Several boxes sat near the entrance. "What happened?" I asked. Emily forced a smile. "We made a few changes." My stomach tightened. When I reached for my house key, Emily gently stopped me. "I have it." "Why?" "I changed the locks." I stared at her. "You changed the locks?" "For your safety." I looked at Jason. He avoided my eyes. "For my safety." Emily helped me out of the car. "The old locks were difficult. You might fall trying to use them." I said nothing. The front door opened. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The furniture had been rearranged. The living room looked different. Daniel's recliner had disappeared. My antique cabinet stood against another wall. Family photographs were missing. Several boxes sat near the staircase. "What happened?" Emily smiled nervously. "We wanted to make things easier." I looked around. The house felt unfamiliar, like a copy of my home, like someone had moved into my life while I was gone. Then I noticed something else. The staircase. A metal gate had been installed. "What is that?" "You shouldn't climb stairs." I laughed softly. "What?" "The doctor said you need to be careful." "My bedroom is upstairs." Emily hesitated. "Not anymore." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She walked toward the hallway. "We moved you downstairs." I followed slowly. She opened the door to the small guest room beside the laundry area. The room contained a narrow bed, a dresser, a chair. Nothing else. I stared. "This is my room. It's temporary." "My bedroom is upstairs." "You can't safely use the stairs." "My bedroom is upstairs." My voice shook. She sighed. "Mom, please don't make this difficult." Difficult. The word felt like a slap. For 40 years, my bedroom had been upstairs. Daniel had died in that room. Our wedding photograph sat beside that bed. Every anniversary card he ever gave me remained inside those drawers. Now I was being told that I couldn't even enter it. "I want to see my room." Emily crossed her arms. "You need to rest." "I want to see my room." Jason finally spoke. "Kayla, the doctor said." "I wasn't speaking to you." The room became silent. Emily looked frustrated. "Fine." She led me upstairs. Halfway up the staircase, my legs trembled. When I reached the bedroom doorway, I stopped breathing. The room was gone. Or at least the room I knew was gone. The furniture had been rearranged. Several boxes sat against the walls. The closet doors stood open. Some of my clothes had disappeared, and beside the bed sat two suitcases, Emily's suitcases. I turned slowly. "What is this?" Emily looked uncomfortable. "We've been staying here." "You've been living here?" "Only temporarily." "Why?" "So we could take care of you." I looked around the room, my marriage, my memories. Everything suddenly felt occupied, invaded. Jason walked in. The commute was becoming difficult. "You moved into my bedroom." Emily spoke quickly. "Only while you recover." I sat on the edge of the bed. Daniel's side of the bed had been replaced with a desk. His lamp was gone. His reading chair had disappeared. I felt tears filling my eyes. Nobody spoke. Finally, I whispered, "You should have asked me." Emily sat beside me. "We did what was best." Those words again. What was best? Not what I wanted, not what I needed. What they believed was best. Over the next several days, more things began troubling me. Workers arrived at the house. A man measured windows. Another examined the roof. Someone took photographs of the living room. Jason always had explanations. Insurance, repairs, maintenance. But something felt wrong. One afternoon, I saw a woman standing in my kitchen with a clipboard. She introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Megan." I smiled politely. She looked around the house. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." She turned to Emily. "Should we discuss the rest now?" Emily quickly interrupted. "Later." The woman nodded and left. After the front door closed, I asked, "Who was she?" Emily answered immediately. "A friend." "What kind of friend?" "No one important." That night, I could not sleep. The downstairs room felt cold, small, temporary. For the first time since returning home, I cried. Not because of my illness, not because of my weakness, because I no longer felt like I belonged inside my own house. The next morning, Linda appeared at my front door. The moment she saw me, she hugged me tightly. "Oh, Kayla. It's good to be home." But her smile faded as she looked around. "Where's your bedroom furniture?" I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She hesitated. "The movers." "What movers?" Her face changed. There were movers here. My heart began beating faster. About 2 weeks ago, I stared at her. "What did they move?" "I assumed you knew." "No." Linda looked uncomfortable. "There were trucks here. Jason was supervising." I felt cold. Very cold. Emily entered the kitchen. Her smile disappeared when she saw Linda. "We were just talking," Linda said. Emily nodded. "Mom needs to rest." Linda looked at me. "I'll call you later." After she left, silence filled the kitchen. Finally, I asked, "What movers?" Emily sighed heavily. "We moved some furniture." "Why? You weren't coming home any time soon." "Who decided that?" "The doctors." "No." My voice trembled. "You decided that." Emily's expression hardened. "We've been taking care of everything." "I never asked you to move my things." "You couldn't make decisions." The words hit me harder than I expected. "I couldn't." "You were very sick." "I still own this house." Emily looked away. Jason entered the room. And then for the first time, I heard words that frightened me. He said quietly, "Kayla, things aren't exactly the same anymore." I looked at him. What does that mean? Neither of them answered, and sitting there, in my own kitchen, surrounded by familiar walls that no longer felt familiar, I experienced a feeling I had never known before. I felt like a guest inside the home that my husband and I had spent 40 years building. And somewhere deep inside me, a terrible thought began to grow. What if I wasn't imagining any of this? What if something had happened while I was sick? Something far bigger than rearranged furniture. Something nobody wanted to tell me. For several days after my conversation with Linda, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. People move furniture. Families make adjustments after illnesses. Children sometimes become overly protective. Perhaps Emily and Jason had simply gone too far while trying to help me. Perhaps my emotions were making everything feel worse. After all, I was still recovering. I became tired easily. My lungs still burned when I walked too far. Some mornings, I struggled to get dressed without resting halfway through. Maybe they truly believed they were doing what was best. That was the story I kept telling myself. But doubt, once it enters your heart, becomes difficult to silence. A week after I returned home, Emily drove to work early. Jason left shortly afterward. For the first time, I found myself alone in the house. Alone in my own home. The silence felt unfamiliar. I slowly walked through the downstairs rooms with my cane. The kitchen, the dining room, the living room. Everything looked slightly different. Not enough for visitors to notice, but enough for me. Daniel's favorite chair was gone. Our family photo albums had disappeared from the bookshelf. Several drawers had been emptied. Some cabinets had been reorganized. My desk in the den no longer contained my paperwork. Even my filing cabinet had been moved. I opened the bottom drawer. Empty. Every file. Gone. Insurance documents, tax records, property papers, Daniel's will, everything. My hands began to shake. I sat down and tried to calm myself. Emily had probably organized them. That explanation still seemed possible, at least until the mail arrived. The mailman placed several envelopes inside the box near the front porch. For the first time since coming home, I walked outside myself. Most of the envelopes were addressed to Emily. One was for Jason. 2 were advertisements. And then I noticed an official-looking envelope with the county seal. The envelope was addressed to Kayla Adams, or current property owner. I frowned. Before I could open it, the front door next door opened. Linda walked toward me. "Kayla," she smiled warmly. "You're outside." I needed some air. She noticed the envelope. "County office." "I think so." She looked at it for several seconds. "Those usually involve taxes." "I suppose." She hesitated. "Do you want me to sit with you?" Something in her voice made me nervous. We sat together on the porch. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a tax assessment notice. I began reading, then I stopped. Read it again, and again, because the words no longer made sense. The property owner listed on the document was not me. The owner was Carter Property Holdings, LLC. I stared at the paper. My vision blurred. "What is this?" Linda took the document. Her expression changed immediately. "Oh my God. What does it mean?" She read the page carefully. "The property owner isn't listed as you." I looked at her. "What does that mean?" She swallowed. "It means the county records show someone else owns the house." The world became strangely quiet. "No." "Kayla." "No." I grabbed the paper. I read it again. Parcel number, address, my home. And under owner Carter Property Holdings, LLC. I looked at Linda. "What is that?" "I don't know." My heart began pounding. "This is impossible." "Have you ever heard of that company?" "No." "Did you sign anything?" I suddenly remembered the hospital, the papers, the folders, the signatures, the medication. My hands began shaking uncontrollably. "I don't remember." Linda leaned closer. "Kayla, did you transfer the house?" "No." "Did you sell it?" "No." "Did you sign any property papers?" "I don't know." The words terrified me. I don't know. For the first time in my entire life, I couldn't trust my own memory. When Emily came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the tax notice in front of me. She immediately saw it. Her face changed, only for a second. But I saw it. "Where did you get that?" "The mailbox." She sat down. "Mom, what is Carter Property Holdings?" She was silent. "What is it?" Jason entered the room. Emily looked at him. Jason looked at the paper. Nobody spoke. Finally, Emily sighed. "It's our company." I stared at her. "Your company?" "Yes." "Why is it listed as owner of my house?" She folded her hands. "Because the property was transferred." My ears began ringing. "What? You signed the documents?" "No." "You did." "I never sold my house." "You didn't sell it." "Then what did I do?" Jason finally spoke. "It was for protection." I looked at him. "I wasn't asking you." Emily's voice became firmer. "The house was transferred into the company." "Why, so we could manage things." "I didn't ask you to manage my house." "You were sick." The room felt smaller, harder to breathe. While you were in the hospital?" My heart nearly stopped. "I was in intensive care." "You were conscious." "I was on medication." "You signed." I stood up too quickly. My legs weakened. Linda reached out to steady me. I had forgotten she was still sitting beside me. Emily looked annoyed. "I don't think this conversation needs an audience." Linda stared directly at her. "I think it absolutely does." Emily's expression hardened. "Mom knew what she was signing." I looked at her. "No." "You did." "No." "You signed power of attorney and transfer documents." The words felt unreal. Transfer documents. I couldn't breathe. "My house." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" "From losing everything. It's my house. You can't maintain it anymore." "That's my decision." "You could end up in a nursing facility." My voice broke. "So you took my house?" "No." "Then what did you do?" Jason answered. "We legally transferred ownership." Linda stood. "You transferred her house while she was sick," Emily snapped. "You don't understand." "No," Linda said quietly. "I understand perfectly." Emily looked back at me. "Mom, eventually the house was going to come to me anyway." Those words cut deeper than anything else. Eventually. Not because she needed a place to live. Not because she wanted to protect me. Because one day, the house would belong to her. And apparently, she had decided she didn't want to wait. Tears rolled down my face. "This was your father's house." Emily's voice softened. "And it still stays in the family." "No." I shook my head. "No, it doesn't." Because suddenly I understood. The moved furniture, the locked doors, the downstairs bedroom, the visitors, the measurements, the strange woman, the company, everything. I looked at my daughter, the little girl I had carried, the woman I trusted more than anyone, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of her. Not because she might hurt me physically, because I realized she had already taken something from me. My security, my trust, my home. As Emily continued explaining legal documents, I barely remembered signing. One terrible thought repeated itself inside my mind. If the house no longer belonged to me, what else had I already lost? I did not sleep that night. After Emily and Jason went upstairs, I remained alone at the kitchen table with the tax notice lying in front of me. The house was silent. The clock above the stove ticked steadily. Outside, rain had begun falling against the windows. I sat there for nearly 2 hours, trying to understand how my life had changed without my permission. My home, my marriage, my memories. Everything Daniel and I had spent 40 years building. And now my daughter was telling me that she owned it. Legally. The word echoed in my mind. Legally. How could something be legal if I didn't even remember agreeing to it? Around midnight, I slowly walked upstairs. For a moment, I simply stood outside my old bedroom. The door was slightly open. I could hear the television inside. Emily and Jason were still awake. I wanted to walk in and demand answers. Instead, I returned downstairs. Because suddenly, I felt like a stranger. The next morning, Emily acted as though nothing had happened. She made coffee. She asked if I wanted oatmeal. She discussed doctor's appointments. Not one word about the house. Finally, I said quietly, "When were you going to tell me?" She looked up. "We already discussed it." "No, you informed me." She sighed. "Mom, we've been through this." "No, Emily, we haven't." Jason entered the kitchen. He immediately sensed the tension. "Morning?" Nobody answered. I looked directly at my daughter. "Did you ever plan to tell me?" She folded her arms. "You were sick." "I've been home for almost 2 weeks." "You needed stability." "I needed the truth." Her expression hardened. "You signed the documents." "I don't remember." "That doesn't mean it didn't happen." I stared at her. For the first time in my entire life, I saw something in my daughter's eyes that frightened me. Not anger, not guilt, certainty. She truly believed she was right. "Did you think I was dying?" Emily looked away. "We didn't know." "So you decided to take my house." "We protected it." "From who?" Jason answered. "From probate." I looked at him. "My husband died 4 years ago." "You don't understand finances." I felt my chest tighten. "What did you say?" He shrugged. "These things are complicated." I looked back at Emily. She said nothing, and somehow that hurt more. After breakfast, I called my younger sister Carol. We had never been especially close, but we spoke several times each year. When she answered, I immediately started crying. "Kayla." "They took my house." There was silence. "What are you talking about?" I explained everything. The hospital, the signatures, the company, the transfer. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Then she asked, "Are you sure?" That question nearly broke me, because suddenly I realized something. Nobody knew what had happened. And perhaps nobody would believe me. Later that afternoon, Emily left for work. Jason went to meet a client. I called my cousin Nancy. She hesitated. "Emily said you've been confused since the pneumonia." My entire body became cold. "What?" "She said the medications affected your memory." I could barely speak. "She told people that—" Nancy sounded uncomfortable. "She was worried." Worried. Another word that suddenly meant something very different. Over the next several days, I discovered that Emily had been speaking to family members for weeks. She had told them Mom gets confused. Mom forgets things. Mom struggles to remember conversations. Mom shouldn't make major decisions alone. Mom isn't herself anymore. One by one, people had quietly begun believing that I was losing my mind. Even before I knew my house was gone, I confronted Emily that evening. "You've been telling people I'm confused." Her face immediately changed. "I've been worried." "You told them I can't remember things." "You can't. I remember enough." "You don't even remember signing documents." The words struck me like a knife, because she was right. I didn't, and that uncertainty had become her greatest weapon. I raised my voice. "You took advantage of me." Emily stood. "No." "Yes." "You were sick." "You knew I wasn't thinking clearly." "You signed willingly." "I trusted you." The room became silent. For the first time, tears appeared in Emily's eyes. "You think this was easy for me?" I stared at her. "You stole my house." She suddenly exploded. "I gave up months of my life for you." I stepped backward. "I drove to hospitals every day." She continued. "I handled your bills." "I spoke to doctors." "I cleaned your house." "I sacrificed everything." Her voice cracked. "And what do I get? You treat me like a criminal." I whispered, "Because you acted like one." She looked devastated, but she also looked angry, very angry. Jason entered the room. "What's going on?" Emily turned toward him. "She thinks we stole from her." Jason's expression immediately darkened. "Kayla, that's enough." "No." "You signed the documents." "I was medicated." "You were competent." "You don't know that." He crossed his arms. "The doctors knew what they were doing." My voice shook. "I want copies." "Copies of what?" "Everything." Emily looked surprised. "What?" "Every paper I signed." Jason spoke immediately. "We'll find them." "No." I looked directly at him. "I want them tomorrow." That night, I heard them arguing upstairs. Their voices traveled through the vents. I couldn't understand every word, but I heard enough. "Jason, she remembers more than we thought." "Emily, she doesn't." "Jason, what if she talks to a lawyer?" "Emily, she won't." "Jason, you don't know that." I sat on the edge of my bed listening. My daughter, my son-in-law, talking about me, not with concern, not with love, but with fear. The next morning, Linda arrived unexpectedly. She brought muffins. She sat beside me, and for the first time, I told someone everything, every detail, every conversation, every fear. When I finished, she remained silent. Finally, she said, "Kayla, I need you to answer one question." "What?" "Do you believe your daughter would intentionally hurt you?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to defend Emily. I wanted to blame Jason. I wanted to believe there had been a misunderstanding. But the truth had begun forming inside me. The changed locks, the missing documents, the conversations, the stories told to family, the transfer, the company, the upstairs bedroom. Everything pointed in one direction. And saying it out loud felt like betraying my own child. Tears filled my eyes. "I don't know." Linda reached for my hand. "Then maybe it's time to find out." That evening, Emily handed me a folder. Inside were copies of several documents: medical authorization, power of attorney, bank authorizations, and finally, the property transfer. My signature appeared at the bottom. At least it looked like my signature. But something felt wrong. The letters seemed shaky, uneven. Nothing like the signature I had used for years. I looked at the date. The date made my blood run cold. It was the same day doctors had increased my medication. The same day I barely remembered. The same day I had trouble recognizing my own hospital room. I looked up at Emily. "Where did I sign this?" In your hospital room. Who was there? You and me. Anyone else? A notary. What notary? She hesitated. I don't remember. But suddenly I understood something. If my daughter had spent weeks convincing everyone that I was confused, perhaps she had started doing that long before I ever came home. And maybe the reason she wanted everyone to believe I was losing my memory was because she needed nobody to believe me. The next few days felt like living inside someone else's nightmare. I stopped sleeping. Every sound in the house startled me. Every conversation between Emily and Jason seemed suspicious. Even the walls felt different. I had spent 40 years believing that home was the one place where nobody could hurt me. Now every room carried uncertainty. One morning, I woke up before sunrise and sat alone in the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Daniel used to sit across from me at this exact table. He always read the newspaper first. I always worked on crossword puzzles. 40 years of ordinary mornings. And now, I sat there, wondering whether I legally belonged inside my own home. At 8 o'clock, Emily came downstairs. She looked exhausted. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, she said quietly, "Mom, we can't keep fighting." I looked at her. "I'm not fighting." "You think I stole from you." "Did you?" Her eyes immediately filled with tears. "I was trying to protect you." From what? From losing everything. I already lost everything. She shook her head. "You still have us." Those words hurt, because I wasn't sure that I did. That afternoon, Jason received a phone call while standing in the kitchen. He didn't realize I could hear him from the hallway. "Yes, she's back home." Pause. "No, not yet." Another pause. "We're trying to handle it." I couldn't hear the other voice. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "No, she doesn't understand the situation." The situation. What situation? When he turned around and saw me standing there, he immediately ended the call. "Everything okay?" I asked. He forced a smile. "Business." I no longer believed him. 2 days later, another visitor arrived. The same woman I had seen previously. The woman with the clipboard. This time, she introduced herself. "My name is Megan Foster." She smiled warmly. "I'm sorry, have we met before?" I nodded. "You were here last week." She looked confused. "I've actually been here several times." Several times. I looked at Emily. Emily's face immediately became tense. Megan continued speaking. "Jason said the property would probably be available by summer." The room became silent. Emily quickly interrupted. "Megan, perhaps we should talk outside." The woman looked surprised. "Oh, of course." But before she could leave, I asked the question. "What property?" Megan looked between us. "The house." My heart stopped. "The house?" She looked uncomfortable. "I thought everyone knew." Nobody spoke. Finally, I asked, "Are you a real estate agent?" She nodded. "Yes." I looked at Emily, then Jason, then back at Megan. "Why are you here?" Her smile disappeared. "Jason asked me to evaluate the property." I could barely breathe. "When?" She looked confused. "Several months ago." Several months. Months. Before I had even returned home. Before I knew my house was gone. Before I could walk again. Emily quickly led Megan outside. The front door closed. I sat down because my legs felt weak. Linda happened to arrive 10 minutes later. The moment she saw my face, she knew something had happened. "What is it?" I could barely speak. They're selling my house. Her eyes widened. What? They've been talking to real estate agents. Linda looked furious. Without telling you. I nodded. Tears began rolling down my cheeks. The front door opened. Emily walked back inside. Mom, please let me explain. I stood. No? It's not what you think. Then tell me what it is. Jason entered behind her. The market is good right now. I stared at him. The market? Emily took a deep breath. If you move into assisted living? No. You haven't even listened. I said no. You can't maintain this house. I've maintained it for 40 years. You're not the same person anymore. Those words felt like a knife. Not the same person. Perhaps illness had changed me, but I was still Kayla Adams. I was still Daniel's wife. I was still Emily's mother. I looked directly at my daughter. Did you plan to put me in a nursing home? Her eyes widened. No. Then why are you talking about assisted living? She hesitated. We thought it would be easier. For who? Neither of them answered. Linda spoke quietly. For you or for them? Jason crossed his arms. Linda, this is family business. She looked directly at him. No, this is elder abuse. The room became silent. Emily immediately began crying. That's not fair. Linda didn't move. You transferred her house. Emily sobbed. We were trying to help. I spoke quietly. How much? Everyone looked at me. How much were you planning to sell it for? Jason answered. We haven't decided. How much? Emily whispered. About $600,000. $600,000. The number shocked me. Daniel and I had bought the house for less than $80,000. Years of rising property values had changed everything. And suddenly I understood something. This wasn't simply about protecting me. It wasn't about safety. It wasn't about stairs. It wasn't even about my illness. It was about money. A tremendous amount of money. I sat down slowly. My voice trembled. Jason, are you having financial problems? Nobody answered. I looked at Emily. Are you? She looked away. Linda spoke softly. Kayla. But I continued. How much debt? Jason finally exploded. This isn't any of your business. I looked at him. My house is my business. His face turned red. The business had problems. How much? Emily whispered. Almost $300,000. The room became quiet. I suddenly understood the pieces. The company, the transfer, the planned sale, the nursing home, the real estate agent, the urgency, the lies. They needed money, and my house had become the answer. I looked at my daughter. How long have you known? She started crying again. Jason said we'd lose everything. So you decided I should lose everything first. She covered her face. I didn't know what else to do. For the first time, I saw something that frightened me even more than anger. I saw desperation. Emily wasn't simply being manipulated. She had participated. She had made choices. And somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that taking my home was justified. That evening, I walked upstairs alone. I entered my old bedroom. Daniel's photograph still sat beside the bed. I picked it up. For several minutes, I simply looked at his face. I don't know what to do, I whispered. I imagined what he would say. Daniel had always been calm, practical, strong. And suddenly, I remembered something he told me years earlier. Never ignore the first moment something feels wrong. I sat there for nearly an hour, and while looking at my husband's photograph, another memory surfaced. Daniel's workshop. The old workshop in the garage. His tools, his workbench. The old answering machine connected to the landline he refused to throw away. The machine we hadn't used in years. The machine that automatically recorded calls whenever nobody answered. I had not thought about it once during my illness, but suddenly I remembered something. Emily had been using the house while I was hospitalized. Jason had been here. People had come and gone. Conversations had happened. Phone calls had been made. And somewhere deep inside me, a small voice whispered, "What if something was left behind? What if the house remembered something that I didn't?" For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope, very small, very fragile, but hope nonetheless, because perhaps the truth had not disappeared. Perhaps it had simply been waiting for me to find it. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in months, I had a purpose. The thought about Daniel's workshop had stayed with me all night. The old answering machine, the forgotten landline, the dusty shelves that nobody had touched since my husband died. If there was even the smallest chance that something had been recorded, I needed to know. The house was silent. Emily and Jason were still asleep upstairs. I dressed quietly, put on my sweater, and walked toward the garage. The workshop sat behind the garage, separated by a small wooden door Daniel had installed himself years earlier. Nobody used it anymore. Not even me. After Daniel died, entering that room had become too painful. The smell of sawdust, the tools, his handwriting on jars filled with screws. Everything reminded me of him. I opened the door. Dust floated through the early morning light. The room looked exactly as he had left it. His workbench, his old radio, the calendar from 4 years earlier still hanging on the wall, and beside the shelves sat the old telephone. The answering machine remained connected. I stared at it. For years, Daniel refused to throw it away. "What if someone calls?" he always said. Nobody had called that number in ages. At least, that was what I believed. I pressed the power button. Nothing happened. The machine was dead. Of course it was. I almost laughed at myself. Then I noticed the power cord had become disconnected. My hands trembled as I plugged it back into the wall. A red light blinked. One message. My heart skipped. One message. The machine slowly beeped. Message 1. Date unavailable. And suddenly I heard static. Then silence. Then Emily's voice. "Mom isn't answering." I froze. The recording continued. Emily sounded irritated. "I told you she'd still be asleep." Then another voice. Jason. Except he wasn't speaking to the machine. He didn't realize it had answered. There was a sound, perhaps a door closing. Then Jason said, "We need to get everything signed before she gets stronger." I stopped breathing. Emily answered, "The medication is keeping her calm." Jason, "If she comes home and changes her mind, we're finished." Silence. I stood completely still. Then Emily spoke again. "She trusts me." Jason laughed softly. "Good, because if the transfer isn't finished, we're stuck." My hands began shaking. The recording continued. Emily said, "She doesn't even read the papers." Jason, "Make sure she signs every page." Emily, "The doctor said she was confused yesterday." Jason, "Even better." The room began spinning. I grabbed the workbench to steady myself. I wanted to stop listening, but I couldn't. Then came the words that changed everything. Emily said quietly. Once the house is in the company, she can't undo it. Jason answered, exactly. Silence. Then Emily spoke again. What if she remembers? Jason laughed. Everyone already thinks she's confused. The message ended. The machine beeped. The room became silent. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. For several minutes, I simply stood there, because suddenly every doubt disappeared, every question, every uncertainty. They knew. They had planned it, while I was sick, while I was medicated, while I trusted my daughter. Tears rolled down my face. Not because of the house, because of Emily. Because the little girl I had carried in my arms had discussed taking my home while I fought to stay alive. I pressed the replay button, again and again. Each time the words became clearer. Get everything signed. She trusts me. Once the house is in the company. Everyone already thinks she's confused. By the fourth time, I was shaking so badly that I could barely stand. At that moment, I heard footsteps. I turned. Linda stood in the doorway. She had come to check on me. One look at my face, and she knew something was wrong. Kayla. I couldn't speak. I pointed toward the machine. What happened? Listen. She sat beside me. I pressed play. The recording began. We listened together. When it ended, Linda covered her mouth. Oh my God. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, Do they know this exists? I shook my head. No. How old is this? I don't know. She looked at the machine. The date isn't showing. We listened again. There was no mistake. The voices were clear. Emily, Jason, their plan, their intentions, everything. Linda finally spoke. Kayla, this changes everything. I looked at her. My daughter did this. Tears filled my eyes again. I kept blaming Jason. Linda nodded gently. I know. But she knew. Yes. She helped him. Yes. The hardest truth was not that Jason had used me. He was not my son. He had never loved me like Daniel did. The hardest truth was that Emily had participated. She had sat beside my hospital bed. She had brushed my hair. She had held my hand, and all the while she had been helping take my home. Linda reached for my hand. You need a lawyer. The word frightened me. Lawyer, court, police, family. I shook my head. I can't do that. You have to. She's my daughter. And you're her mother. The tears returned, because both things were true. Around noon, we carefully disconnected the answering machine. Linda found several old cassette tapes inside the machine. One still contained the recording. She placed it inside her purse. We need to protect this. I nodded. For the first time in weeks, I felt something strange. Not hope, exactly. Strength. Because I was no longer questioning myself. I was not confused. I was not imagining things. I was not losing my memory. The evidence existed. And suddenly, I understood why Emily had worked so hard to convince everyone that I was forgetful. Because if people believed I was confused, then nobody would believe me. But now, I had something that didn't rely on my memory. The machine remembered. The house remembered. Daniel's old workshop remembered. That afternoon, Emily came home. I sat quietly in the kitchen. The answering machine was hidden inside Linda's house. Emily smiled. How are you feeling? I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I saw a stranger. The same face, the same eyes, the same voice, but someone I no longer knew. She noticed my expression. "Mom," I spoke calmly. "When exactly did I sign the papers?" Her face tightened slightly. "We already discussed that." "I want to hear it again." She sat down. "You signed them in the hospital." "Was Jason there?" "No." The lie came instantly. I simply nodded. "And nobody discussed transferring the house?" She looked directly into my eyes. "No." Another lie. The second one came even easier. I realized then that Emily believed she was still safe. She believed I remained confused. She believed the secret had survived. She had no idea that an old machine hidden inside her father's workshop had recorded the truth. And for the first time since my illness began, I understood something. The fight for my home had finally begun. I did not tell Emily about the recording. I did not tell Jason. And for the first time since my illness began, I stopped reacting and started planning. Linda insisted that we move carefully. "Once they know you have evidence, they'll change their story," she said. The following morning, she drove me to a small law office downtown. The brass sign outside the building read, "Rebecca Hayes, Elder Law, Attorney." I had never hired a lawyer in my life. Daniel handled taxes. Insurance agents handled insurance. Banks handled money. People like me didn't hire attorneys. But as I walked slowly through those glass doors, I realized something. People like me often wait too long. Rebecca Hayes was 62 years old. She wore silver glasses and spoke softly. Nothing about her felt intimidating. She offered coffee. She asked about my health. She asked about Daniel. She asked about my teaching career. Only after nearly 20 minutes did she finally ask, "Kayla, tell me exactly what happened." And for the first time, I told the entire story. The pneumonia, the hospital, the signatures, the company, the transfer, the real estate agent, the downstairs bedroom, the recording. When I finished, Rebecca remained silent. She folded her hands, then she asked one question. "When did you first discover the property transfer?" "About 2 weeks ago." "And before that?" "I didn't know." She nodded. "Did anyone explain the transfer to you before you signed?" "I don't remember." "Did you intend to give your house away?" "No." "Did you intend to transfer ownership?" "No." She looked at me carefully. "Kayla, do you still have the recording?" Linda removed the cassette from her purse. Rebecca listened to it twice. When it ended, she sat quietly. Then she said words that changed everything. "This is very serious." I looked at her. "Can I get my house back?" She answered honestly, "I don't know yet." My heart sank. "But," she continued, "you absolutely have grounds to investigate." For the first time in weeks, I felt someone was speaking to me instead of about me. Rebecca explained several things: power of attorney, undue influence, capacity, fraud, elder financial abuse, words I had never imagined applying to my own daughter. She asked for copies of every document. I handed her the folder Emily had given me. Rebecca read each page carefully. She stopped at the property transfer. Her expression changed. "Who notarized this?" "I don't know." "Was this person in your hospital room?" "I honestly can't remember." She looked at the date. "When was your medication increased?" I thought for a moment. "The same day." Rebecca wrote something down. "Interesting." She then asked for permission to obtain my medical records. I agreed immediately. As we prepared to leave, I suddenly became frightened. What if I'm wrong? Rebecca looked directly at me. About what? What if Emily really thought she was helping me? She sat quietly for several seconds. Then she said, "Intent matters, but so does consent." I didn't fully understand. She continued, "If you were incapable of understanding the documents, that's important. If you were pressured, that's important. If someone benefited financially, that's important." She paused. "And if someone secretly discussed transferring your house while you were medicated, that's extremely important." Linda drove me home. The entire ride felt unreal. Lawyers, evidence, investigation, my daughter, my own child. When we arrived, Emily was already home. She immediately noticed my absence. "Where were you?" I removed my coat. "Out." "Out where?" "With Linda." She looked suspicious. "You should have told me." I looked at her. "I'm 68 years old. I'm just worried." There was that word again. Worried. I simply nodded. That evening, Jason entered the kitchen while I was making tea. For the first time in weeks, we were alone. He stood quietly for several moments. Then he said, "You've been talking to people." I turned. "What people?" "Family." I stared at him. "This is my life." He crossed his arms. "Emily is upset." "I imagine she is." He spoke carefully. "You're making things harder." My voice remained calm. "You already made things hard." He sighed. "We took care of you." "No." He looked surprised. "No. You took control." His expression hardened. "You needed help." "I needed my daughter." He didn't answer. I continued. "How long have your business problems existed?" His face changed immediately. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Silence. "I know about the debt." He looked away. "We had difficulties. And my house solved them." His jaw tightened. "You have no idea what pressure we've been under." I stared at him. "My husband died." "I almost died. I lost my home." "And you want to discuss pressure?" For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he quietly said, "You don't understand, Emily." Those words surprised me. "What does that mean?" "She loves you." "Does she? She was terrified you'd die?" I felt tears rising. "Then why did she take my house?" He looked down, and for the first time I saw guilt. "Real guilt," he whispered. "Because she thought she'd lose everything." I couldn't tell whether he meant me or the money. The next morning, Rebecca called. She had already reviewed the county records. "Carter Property Holdings was formed 6 months ago." I sat up. 6 months? Yes. My heart started beating faster. That was before I became seriously ill. Before the pneumonia. Before the hospitalization. Before any signatures. "Are you certain?" "Yes." The room became cold. Because suddenly the timeline changed. This wasn't a decision made during my illness. The company already existed. The structure already existed. The plan may have existed. I could barely speak. Rebecca continued. "We also requested your medical records." "What happens now?" "I need more information." "Can they sell the house?" She paused. "Possibly." The fear returned immediately. "What do we do?" "I'm preparing emergency paperwork." "What kind?" "A temporary injunction." The legal words frightened me, but Rebecca spoke calmly. We may be able to stop any transfer or sale until this is resolved. After the call ended, I sat quietly. Emily entered the kitchen. She looked tired, very tired. "Mom." I looked up. She sat beside me. For several moments, she said nothing. Then quietly, "Do you hate me?" The question broke my heart, because part of me still saw the little girl who climbed into my lap during thunderstorms, the teenager who cried after her first heartbreak, the bride who asked me to zip her wedding dress. I whispered, "I don't know who you are right now." Tears rolled down her face. "I was scared." "So was I." She looked at her hands. "We thought you were dying." "And you prepared to sell my house." She couldn't answer. I wanted her to confess. I wanted her to explain. I wanted her to tell me it had all been Jason. But she didn't. And her silence told me something even worse. She had made her own choices. That afternoon, Rebecca called again. Her voice was serious. "Kayla, there's something else." "What?" "The signature on the transfer documents looks very different from the signatures on your previous legal documents." I felt my stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" "It means we may need a handwriting expert." Silence. Then she said words I never imagined hearing. "There may be evidence of fraud." And suddenly, I realized the fight for my home was becoming something much larger than a family argument. It was becoming a legal battle. And my daughter was standing on the other side. The following week became the longest week of my life. For the first time since my illness began, I stopped behaving like a frightened mother and started behaving like someone fighting for survival. Rebecca filed emergency paperwork to prevent any sale of the house until ownership questions could be resolved. She explained every step carefully. "The court won't decide ownership immediately," she said, "but we can stop them from transferring or selling the property." I sat in her office, gripping a cup of coffee. I never imagined my daughter and I would end up here. Rebecca nodded. "Most people don't." The temporary order arrived 3 days later. When Emily received the notice, she stood in the kitchen holding the envelope with trembling hands. "What is this?" I looked up from the table. "My attorney filed it." Her face turned pale. "Attorney?" "Yes?" She stared at me. "You hired a lawyer?" I nodded. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then tears filled her eyes. "You sued me." The words hurt, because in some ways, it felt true. I wasn't only fighting for my house, I was fighting my own child. I protected myself. "You don't trust me." I looked at her quietly. "No." That single word seemed to break something inside her. She walked upstairs and locked herself in the bedroom. I heard her crying. And despite everything that had happened, I cried too. Because no mother dreams of becoming her daughter's enemy. That evening, Jason came downstairs. He placed the legal papers on the kitchen table. "This has gone too far." I looked directly at him. "No, it started too far." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand exactly." He lowered his voice. "Emily is falling apart," I answered calmly. "So am I." He sat down. For the first time, his confidence seemed gone. The man who always had answers suddenly looked tired. "Kayla, the business failed." I remained silent. "We lost contracts." "We borrowed money. We fell behind." He rubbed his eyes. "I thought we'd recover." "And when you didn't?" He looked away. "The house became the only solution." Those words finally came out. Not protection, not concern, not safety. The house became the solution. My home had become their rescue plan. I asked quietly, "Whose idea was it?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "Both of you." He didn't answer. Later that evening, Emily finally came downstairs. Her eyes were swollen. She sat across from me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at her. "Then why did you—" She began crying again. "I was scared." "So was I. I thought you were dying. And if I had died—" She looked down. "I don't know." The truth was becoming visible. There had never been one evil person and one innocent person. Jason had financial desperation. Emily had fear. Together, they made terrible decisions, but understanding their reasons did not erase what they had done. 2 days later, Rebecca called. "We received your medical records." My heart began racing. "What do they say?" "There are concerns." I sat down immediately. "What kind of concerns?" She read from the report. "High fever. Heavy medication. Episodes of confusion. Periods of disorientation." The room suddenly felt warmer. "Does that help?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because the transfer documents were signed during one of those periods." I closed my eyes. For the first time, official records supported what I had been saying. I wasn't imagining my condition. I wasn't inventing my confusion. The hospital had documented it. Rebecca continued. "The notary information is also concerning." "What do you mean?" "The notary didn't meet with you privately." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "In transactions involving elderly individuals, especially large transfers, notaries often verify understanding." "And there are no notes." Silence. Then she said, "Kayla, the case is becoming stronger." The following Sunday, several family members arrived unexpectedly. My sister Carol, my cousin Nancy, even my nephew Michael. Apparently, Emily had told them about the legal situation. The atmosphere inside the house became unbearable. Everyone sat in the living room. Nobody knew where to look. Finally, Carol spoke. "Kayla, are you sure about this?" I looked at my sister. "Yes." Emily began crying immediately. "I was trying to help her." Nancy reached for her hand. My stomach turned, because once again Emily looked like the victim. The devoted daughter, the exhausted caregiver, the woman who sacrificed everything. And I looked like the angry old mother, the confused patient, the woman who couldn't remember. Until I finally said, "There is something all of you need to hear." The room became quiet. I looked at Emily. Her face suddenly changed. Perhaps she sensed something. I reached into my purse. The cassette tape sat inside. Jason immediately became pale. "What is that?" I looked directly at him. "The truth." Emily stared at me. "What are you talking about?" I placed the small recorder Linda had borrowed onto the coffee table. My hands trembled. So did my voice. "This was recorded in your father's workshop." Emily looked confused. Jason did not. He knew. The moment I pressed play, the entire room became silent. Emily's voice. Jason's voice. "We need to get everything signed. She trusts me. Once the house is in the company. Everyone already thinks she's confused." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The recording ended. The silence afterward felt enormous. Carol covered her mouth. Nancy stared at Emily. Michael looked at Jason with disbelief. And Emily herself simply sat there, completely motionless. Finally, Carol whispered, "Emily." My daughter started crying. Not the tears she had cried before. Different tears. The tears of someone who realizes the truth can no longer be hidden. Jason stood abruptly. "This recording doesn't prove anything." Nobody answered him. Because everyone had heard it. Every word, every plan, every lie. Emily finally spoke. "I didn't mean," I interrupted. "What exactly didn't you mean?" She looked at me, and for the first time in months, she stopped defending herself. Her shoulders collapsed. Her voice broke. "I was afraid." The room remained silent. "I thought we were going to lose everything." I whispered, "So you decided I should lose everything first?" No one had an answer. That night, after everyone left, Emily sat alone at the kitchen table. I walked in quietly. She looked up. "Mom." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said the words I had waited months to hear. "I'm sorry." Tears filled my eyes because I had wanted those words, needed them, prayed for them. But they came too late. Much too late. I sat across from her. "Did you love me while you were doing this?" She began crying again. "Yes." "Then why didn't you stop?" She looked down at her hands, and finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she answered, "Because by the time I realized how wrong it was, I didn't know how to go back." For the first time, I saw not only my daughter. I saw a frightened woman who had followed fear so far that she no longer recognized herself. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. And although the truth had finally been exposed, the legal battle and the final decision about my home was still ahead. 2 weeks later, Rebecca arranged a mediation meeting. She explained that before the case moved deeper into court, both sides would have an opportunity to speak present evidence and possibly reach an agreement. I didn't want an agreement. I wanted my house. But Rebecca gently reminded me, sometimes the truth comes out before a judge ever enters the room. The meeting took place in a small office building downtown. I barely slept the night before. At 6 o'clock that morning, I sat alone in my kitchen. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. Emily and Jason had spent the night at a hotel after Rebecca advised that temporary distance might help reduce conflict. The silence should have comforted me. Instead, it made me sad. Because once upon a time, family gatherings had filled this house with laughter. Birthday parties, Christmas dinners, Thanksgiving mornings. Emily running down the stairs as a little girl. Daniel cooking pancakes. Those memories felt painfully distant now. Linda drove me to the mediation office. Rebecca met us outside. She carried several folders, my medical records, property documents, county filings, the recording, evidence. The word still felt unreal. Evidence against my own daughter. Emily and Jason arrived 10 minutes later. Emily looked exhausted. She had lost weight. Her eyes were swollen. Jason looked older than I remembered. For the first time, neither of them appeared confident. We sat in separate rooms. The mediator, a gray-haired woman named Patricia, explained the process. No shouting. No interruptions. Everyone will have a chance to speak. Simple rules. Rules that families should never need. The first hour focused on paperwork, property records, hospital dates, medical reports, the creation date of Carter Property Holdings. Rebecca spoke calmly. The company existed before Mrs. Adams became ill. Jason immediately responded, "That doesn't prove anything." Rebecca nodded. "Correct, but it establishes planning." Emily sat silently. Patricia then turned toward me. Mrs. Adams, can you explain your understanding of these documents? My voice trembled. I thought I was signing paperwork related to my medical care and bills. Did anyone explain that ownership of your home was changing? No. Did you intend to transfer your house? No. Patricia nodded. Then she turned toward Emily. Mrs. Carter. Emily looked down. Her hands shook. We thought we were helping. Rebecca asked quietly, Who is we? Emily hesitated. Jason and I. Jason immediately interrupted. This was about protecting her assets. Rebecca looked directly at him. From whom? No answer. She continued. Did Mrs. Adams ask you to transfer her home? No. Did she request placement in assisted living? No. Did she ask you to establish a company? No. The room became silent. Patricia then asked Emily, When did you first discuss transferring the property? Emily looked toward Jason. Rebecca immediately spoke. Please answer independently. Emily swallowed. I don't remember. Rebecca opened another folder. The company was established 6 months before Kayla became ill. Emily began crying. I was scared. Rebecca remained calm. Were you scared before she became ill? No answer. Another question. When did discussions about selling the house begin? Jason answered. After she got sick. Rebecca slid a document across the table. It was Megan Foster's preliminary property evaluation. The date, 4 months earlier, before the pneumonia, before the hospital, before everything. Jason became silent. For the first time that morning, fear appeared in his eyes. Then Rebecca looked toward me. Kayla, would you like the recording played? My entire body became cold. I looked at Emily. She was already crying. For a brief moment, I almost said no. She was still my daughter. I remembered her first day of school. I remembered teaching her to ride a bicycle. I remembered holding her after her first heartbreak. But then I remembered the hospital, the signatures, the lies, the house. I quietly said, yes. The room became silent. Rebecca pressed play. Emily's voice, Jason's voice. She trusts me. Get everything signed. Once the house is in the company. Everyone already thinks she's confused. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. When the recording ended, even Patricia sat silently. Emily covered her face. Jason stared at the table. Rebecca finally spoke. Emily, is that your voice? Several seconds passed. Then, yes. And Jason's, yes. Another long silence. Patricia looked gently at Emily. Can you explain these statements? Emily's shoulders began shaking. I didn't know what to do, Rebecca asked. What didn't you know? Tears streamed down Emily's face. Jason said we could lose everything. What everything? The business. And that justified taking your mother's home? Emily cried harder. No. Then why did you do it? For the first time since all of this began, Emily stopped defending herself. She stopped blaming Jason. She stopped blaming fear. She stopped blaming my illness. She looked directly at me and quietly said, Because I wanted it. The room became perfectly still. Even Jason looked shocked. Emily continued, I hated seeing the house sit there. Tears fell onto the table. I thought eventually it would belong to me. She looked at me. And after Dad died, I started thinking about it all the time. My heart broke, not because of the house, because of those thoughts. While I was grieving Daniel, While I was learning how to live alone, my daughter had already begun imagining the house as hers. Emily continued speaking. When Jason's business failed, everything became worse. She wiped her eyes. I told myself Mom wouldn't need the house forever. I could barely breathe. And when she got sick, her voice broke completely. I convinced myself I was helping. Patricia spoke softly. Were you helping? Emily shook her head. No. Did your mother understand what she signed? No. Did she agree to give you her house? Emily whispered. No. I closed my eyes, because those 3 letters changed everything. No. The room remained silent for nearly a minute. Then Jason finally spoke. You knew we needed money. Emily looked at him. No. You wanted the house too. She turned toward him. No. You agreed. And suddenly the truth emerged. Not one villain, not one victim. 2 people who slowly convinced each other that stealing from an elderly mother could somehow become love. Rebecca quietly closed her folder. The legal battle might continue. The court might still rule. But emotionally, the case had already ended. Emily looked at me. I don't expect you to forgive me. Tears filled my eyes. Good. She lowered her head. Because I don't forgive myself. When the meeting ended, Rebecca walked beside me to the parking lot. How are you feeling? I honestly didn't know. The truth had finally arrived. The lies had ended. My daughter had admitted everything. And somehow, victory didn't feel the way I expected. Because when strangers hurt you, anger is easy. When your own child hurts you, there is no simple emotion. Only grief. As I got into Linda's car, I looked back at the building. Emily stood alone outside. Jason had already walked away. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not because she had lost the house, but because she had finally lost the lie she had been living inside. And for the first time in months, I realized something. The court might decide who owned the house, but my daughter had already sentenced herself. The mediation ended, but nothing inside me felt settled. Confessions had been made. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. Yet when I returned home that evening, the house still felt divided. The downstairs bedroom remained mine. Emily's clothes still hung upstairs. Jason's truck still sat in the driveway, and every wall seemed to carry the weight of everything that had happened. Linda stayed with me that night. Neither of us spoke much. At one point, she asked quietly, "Do you think you can forgive her?" I stared at the ceiling. I don't know. Do you want to? That question was harder, because forgiveness and trust are different things. A mother can forgive, but a mother who has been betrayed by her own child learns that trust is fragile. The next morning, I found Emily sitting alone in the kitchen. Jason had already left. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside her. She looked older, smaller, almost like the frightened little girl she once had been. When she saw me, she stood. I should probably leave. I nodded. Maybe. She looked down. I don't know where to go. I felt a pain inside my chest. Because despite everything, she was still my daughter. She was still the child who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms, but she was also the woman who had taken my home. I think you need some time away. She began crying. I know. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, Do you hate me? The same question again. And this time, I answered honestly. No. She looked surprised. I don't hate you. My voice trembled. But I don't recognize you anymore. Those words hurt both of us. She quietly walked upstairs. 2 hours later, she came down carrying 2 suitcases. She stopped beside the front door. I'll stay with Carol for a while. I nodded. She looked at me. Mom? I waited. I'm sorry isn't enough. No. She lowered her head. I know. The front door closed, and for the first time in months, the house became mine again. But it did not feel like victory. It felt like loss. 3 days later, Rebecca called. We have good news. I sat down immediately. What happened? The court approved the temporary injunction. I exhaled. What does that mean? It means the property cannot be sold. For the first time, I felt safe. At least temporarily. The house would stay. The real estate listing would stop. No buyers, no sales, no transfers. Rebecca continued. The next hearing is scheduled in 6 weeks. I nodded. And the recording? It's extremely important. What about Emily's confession? Also important. She paused. Kayla, most cases don't include this much evidence. I closed my eyes. Evidence. Such a cold word for something that had destroyed my family. Over the following weeks, more information surfaced. Jason's business debt had grown larger than anyone realized. Nearly $400,000. Several loans, credit lines, overdue payments. One investor had already filed legal action. The pressure had become enormous. And somewhere along the way, my house had become their solution. Rebecca later explained something that changed how I saw everything. People rarely wake up planning to become villains. I listened quietly. They make small decisions. They justify them. They convince themselves they're helping. They tell themselves it's temporary. She looked directly at me. Until one day, they cross a line they never imagined crossing. That was Emily. Not evil, not cruel, but weak, fearful, and willing to follow fear further than love. About 2 weeks later, Jason came to see me alone. He stood at the front porch for several minutes before knocking. I almost didn't answer, but I did. He looked exhausted. His hair had grayed. His eyes seemed hollow. Can I come in? I nodded. We sat in the living room. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he said, This is my fault. I looked at him. No. He looked surprised. It isn't only yours. He nodded slowly. I pushed her. I know. I told her we'd lose everything. I know. He lowered his head. I was desperate. I sat quietly. That doesn't excuse it. No. He looked at Daniel's photograph above the fireplace. He would hate me. I answered honestly. Yes. The room became silent. Then he reached into his jacket and placed several documents on the table. What is this? My resignation from the company. I looked at him. I'm dissolving Carter Property Holdings. I said nothing. He continued. The debts are mine. Not hers. Not yours. His voice broke. I should have never brought her into it. For the first time, I saw genuine regret. Not legal fear, not financial fear. Regret. Before leaving, he stopped at the door. I really did care about you. I looked at him. I believe that. He seemed surprised. But caring about someone doesn't give you the right to take from them. He nodded, and then he left. Several days later, Emily called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, she said, "I'm seeing a counselor." I remained silent. "I need help." Tears filled my eyes, because that was the first honest thing she had said in months. She continued, "I spent so much time blaming Jason. I blamed money. I blamed fear." Her voice trembled. But I made my own choices. I closed my eyes. "Yes." She began crying. "I don't know how to fix this." I answered quietly, "You can't fix it." Silence. "But maybe one day you can rebuild it." She cried harder, and for the first time I heard my daughter instead of the stranger she had become. Weeks passed. My health slowly improved. I walked without my cane. I returned to gardening. I sat on my porch again. Neighbors stopped by. Linda visited often. The house slowly began feeling like home. One afternoon, I entered Daniel's workshop. The old answering machine still sat on the shelf. Dust covered it again. The machine that had saved me. The machine that remembered when I could not. I sat beside Daniel's workbench, and suddenly I began crying. Not for the house, not for the court, not even for Emily. I cried for the woman I had been before all of this, the woman who believed family could never betray her. That woman was gone, but another woman had emerged, stronger, wiser, and no longer afraid to defend herself. As I sat there, I realized something. The legal case was still ahead. The final decision had not yet arrived. But emotionally, I had already reclaimed something far more important than my house. I had reclaimed my voice. And after months of silence, confusion, and fear, I was finally ready to use it. The final hearing arrived on a cold Thursday morning. Nearly 8 months had passed since I first entered the hospital. 8 months since pneumonia nearly took my life. 8 months since I signed documents I could not remember. 8 months since my daughter quietly transferred my home away from me. The courthouse stood downtown, surrounded by old oak trees that had begun losing their leaves. Linda drove me there. Neither of us spoke much. As we entered the building, I felt strangely calm. For months, I had lived with fear. Fear of losing my home. Fear of losing my daughter. Fear of losing myself. But that morning, something had changed. The truth no longer belonged to Emily and Jason. The truth belonged to everyone. Rebecca met us outside the courtroom. She smiled gently. "How are you feeling?" "Nervous." "That's normal." She handed me a small folder. Inside were copies of the medical records, the property transfer, the recording transcript, Emily's mediation statement, evidence, proof. Things I never imagined would exist between a mother and daughter. When Emily arrived, she came alone. Jason was not with her. I immediately noticed the difference. She looked healthier than she had several months earlier. She seemed quieter, humbler. She walked toward me slowly. "Mom." I nodded. She looked at Linda, then back at me. "I just wanted to say something before we go inside." I waited. If I could undo all of this, I would. Tears filled her eyes. "I know that doesn't change anything." No, she nodded, but I wanted you to hear it. For a moment, I saw my daughter again. Not the woman who transferred my home, not the woman who lied, simply Emily, broken, ashamed, human. Before I could answer, Rebecca touched my arm. It's time. Inside the courtroom, everything felt smaller than I expected. No dramatic speeches, no crowded audience, just a judge, attorneys, documents, and a family that had fallen apart. The hearing lasted nearly 4 hours. Rebecca carefully presented every piece of evidence: the medical records, the medication schedule, the periods of confusion, the timing of the signatures, the company records, the property evaluation, the recording. When the audio played, nobody looked at Emily. Nobody needed to. The words spoke for themselves. She trusts me. Get everything signed. Everyone already thinks she's confused. The judge listened quietly. Emily's attorney argued that she believed she was helping, that she feared for my health, that financial stress clouded her judgment. But even he did not deny what happened. When it was my turn to speak, my hands trembled. The judge asked, "Mrs. Adams, what do you want from this court?" I thought about the question. Money, punishment, revenge. None of those felt right. I looked directly at the judge. "I want my home," he nodded. "And anything else." My voice became softer. "I want my daughter to understand what she took from me." The room became silent. Because it had never been only about property. It was about trust, safety, family, dignity. After several hours, the judge announced a short recess. We all waited. Emily sat alone. I sat beside Linda. Nobody spoke. 45 minutes later, everyone returned. The judge adjusted his glasses and began reading his decision. His voice remained calm. The court finds significant evidence that Mrs. Adams was medically compromised during the execution of the transfer documents. He continued, "The evidence demonstrates undue influence. The court also finds substantial evidence that Mrs. Adams did not fully understand the consequences of the transaction." I held my breath. "The transfer of the property is hereby declared invalid." My eyes immediately filled with tears. The judge continued, "Ownership of the residence shall immediately return to Kayla Adams." I closed my eyes. After months of fear, it was over. My home was mine. Daniel's home. Our home. The judge continued speaking. Additional filings, costs, administrative matters. But I barely heard them, because all I could think was, I came home. When the hearing ended, people slowly began leaving. Rebecca hugged me. Linda cried openly. Even the court clerk smiled kindly. Then I turned and saw Emily. She remained sitting alone. The courtroom had nearly emptied. She looked small, almost fragile. For a moment I considered leaving. Perhaps I should have, but I walked toward her. She looked up. Tears covered her face. "It's over," I nodded. "Yes." She lowered her head. "I'm glad you got the house back." I sat beside her. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I lost everything." I looked at her. "No." She looked confused. "You lost your way." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't know how to fix this." I answered honestly, "You don't." Silence. "But you can start telling the truth." She nodded. "I've already started." For the first time, there was no anger between us, only sadness. Years of trust broken. Years of love damaged. But perhaps not destroyed. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun falling. Small flakes drifted through the cold air. Linda waited beside the car. Rebecca had already left. Emily stood beside me. "Can I ask you something?" I looked at her. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" The question stayed between us. I thought about Daniel, the workshop, the answering machine, the lies, the hospital, the tears, everything. Finally, I answered, "I think forgiveness happens in pieces." She cried quietly. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not." She nodded. "But I still love you." Her entire face collapsed, because that was the truth neither of us could escape. She had betrayed me, and I still loved her. Not because she deserved it, because she was my daughter. As we stood there in the falling snow, I realized something important. Winning in court had saved my house, but healing my family would take much longer. And I did not know if that healing would ever fully come. Emily walked toward her car. Halfway there, she turned back. "I'll wait." "For what?" She wiped her tears. "For however long it takes." I watched her drive away, and for the first time in many months, I no longer felt fear, only grief. And somewhere beneath that grief, a very small hope, because the truth had finally been exposed. The house had returned home, and perhaps someday my daughter might find her way home too. Spring returned to Ohio almost 1 year after I became sick. The maple tree outside my front window began growing leaves again. The garden Daniel and I had planted years earlier slowly came back to life, and for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to believe that I might heal too. The court had returned the house to me. The property records once again carried my name. Carter Property Holdings had been dissolved. Jason moved into a small apartment across town. Emily remained with my sister Carol while attending counseling every week. Life had not become perfect, but it had become honest. And honesty, I learned, is where healing begins. One Saturday morning, Linda brought coffee and sat with me on the front porch. We watched neighbors walk their dogs. Children rode bicycles down the street. Ordinary life continued. For months, I had believed my story was only about betrayal. But sitting there beside my oldest friend, I realized something. There were other women like me. Women who trusted. Women who signed documents they did not understand. Women who believed family members would always protect them. Women who were afraid to speak because they worried nobody would believe them. I looked at Linda. "I want to do something." She smiled. "You already did." "No." I shook my head. "I mean something more." Several weeks later, the local community center allowed me to organize a small support group. At first, only 4 women attended. One had lost money to a grandson. Another had signed documents she did not understand. One woman simply came because she felt lonely. We sat in folding chairs. We drank coffee, we talked, and for the first time since my illness, I discovered that pain becomes lighter when it is shared. I never told them every detail. I never described all of Emily's actions. I never spoke with anger. Instead, I told them something simple. Never believe that love means giving away your voice. Those words became important to me, because for months I had remained silent. I had doubted my own memory, my own instincts, my own truth. And that silence almost cost me everything. One afternoon, Rebecca visited the house. She brought copies of the final legal documents. Everything had been completed. The house officially belonged to me. She sat in Daniel's old chair. I sat beside the fireplace. "You've changed," she said. I smiled. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is." She looked around the room. "What will you do now?" I thought for a moment. "Live." She smiled, and perhaps that was the best answer. Several weeks later, Emily called. We had spoken only briefly since the hearing. Mostly simple conversations. "Are you feeling okay? Did you take your medicine? How is the garden?" Nothing deeper. Nothing dangerous. This call felt different. "Mom." "Yes." "My counselor asked me a question." I waited. She asked me when I first started thinking about the house. I closed my eyes. And Emily began crying. It was after Dad died. I said nothing. "I started worrying about the future," she continued. "Then Jason's business got worse. And I started telling myself that eventually the house would belong to me." Her voice shook, and I stopped seeing it as your home. The honesty hurt, but honesty also heals. She whispered, "I stopped seeing you as my mother." I could barely speak. "What did you see?" "An inheritance." Those words broke my heart, because they were true. But for the first time, Emily was finally telling the truth. Months passed. Summer arrived. The support group grew. 8 women, then 12, then 20. The local newspaper even wrote a small article about protecting seniors from financial abuse. I never shared my family's name. I never embarrassed Emily. Some stories belong to the people inside them. One afternoon, Emily asked if she could visit. I spent nearly an hour deciding. Finally, I said yes. When she arrived, she looked nervous. She stood outside the front door exactly where she had stood hundreds of times before. Only now, she waited. "May I come in?" That question mattered, because she was asking, not taking. I nodded. She walked inside slowly. Her eyes moved around the living room. Daniel's chair had returned. My photographs were back. The furniture sat exactly where it belonged. The house felt peaceful. We sat together at the kitchen table. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she handed me an envelope. "What is this?" "A letter." I opened it. Several pages, handwritten. She had written about everything. The lies, the fear, the greed, the guilt, the counseling, the shame. At the very end, she wrote, "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope one day I can become someone my father would recognize again." Tears filled my eyes. I folded the letter. Emily looked down. "I'll understand if you never trust me again." I answered honestly. "Trust takes time." She nodded. "I know." "And forgiveness takes time." She whispered, "I know that too." We sat quietly, and then something happened that I had not expected. She reached across the table, not demanding, not asking, simply reaching. I looked at her hand, the same hand I had held when she crossed the street as a child. The same hand I had held in the hospital after she was born. Slowly, I placed my hand over hers. We both cried, not because everything was fixed, because it wasn't. Some wounds heal slowly. Some scars remain forever. But healing had finally begun. That evening, after Emily left, I walked into Daniel's workshop. The old answering machine still sat on the shelf. Dust covered it again. I touched it gently. A machine had saved my house. But something else had saved me. The decision to speak. The decision to fight. The decision to believe my own voice. I looked around the workshop. For years, I believed growing older meant becoming weaker. Now I understood something different. Growing older means understanding your worth, understanding your boundaries, understanding that love without respect is not truly love. As the sun began setting outside, I sat at Daniel's workbench one final time. "My house is safe," I whispered, and somehow, in the quietness of that room, I felt that he already knew. My name is Kayla Adams. I almost lost my home. I almost lost my voice. I almost lost my daughter. But in the end, I found something even more important. I found myself.